Welcome back to Kapowich on Real Estate. This is a program dedicated to consumer protection within the residential real estate arena. I'm embarrassed to say it took 200 programs to have movers on the show, but we are pleased to have Bob and Mitchell Lansinger from, it's an Atlas franchise, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's Vector, a move ahead.
Correct.
So now Mitchell, I think in comparison to the insurance industry, they have Allstate Insurance and State Farm Insurance and so on, and then it might be John Smith, Allstate Insurance.
Exactly.
That's how it works with...
Roughly speaking, yeah. Atlas would be the equivalent of the Allstates, and then Vector, us, the local company, we're the John Smith or whoever you talk about, yeah.
Now you had, Bob, you've mentioned in the past, and I met you at the real estate boards. Of course, you work closely with the real estate community.
Yes, I do. I'm the affiliate chair of SAMCAR and a recent member with Silvar now.
Okay, now what acronyms? What is SAMCAR?
SAMCAR, San Mateo County Association of Realtors.
And
headquartered
Silvar?
in San Mateo. And Silvar is the Silicon Valley Association of Realtors, headquartered in Cupertino.
Okay, we got to get you down to the Santa Clara County Association of Realtors, so you'll be working your way south here. After the show, you'll be so busy down there.
Absolutely.
You're okay. So one of the things, and I never really learned about moving in detail as we have in the real estate law or insurance or termite control and things like that. And we hear about moving as the great American nightmare. And of course, consumers talk about, when I hear about how was your move, and they say, oh, we had the best movers. You know, over the years that we had, it was nightmare. Okay, so let's talk about that. First of all, how can a consumer, well, we'll start with Mitchell, his father-son team here, right?
Absolutely.
Well, they have the young buck take over.
Absolutely.
How can the family, I know there's the survey and the estimate process. I know sometimes homeowners will say, I'm meeting a mover on Tuesday and then another one on Wednesday. What is that first visit all about?
Ultimately, it's all about getting a familiarity with the face of the company. I mean, your estimator, your surveyor is ultimately the first contact you have with the company. That's really, they're out there the first in your face. You may have made a phone appointment or something, but they give you the real sense of who the company is and what they really stand for. I mean, a lot of the estimators, a lot of the surveyors, they're salesmen, obviously, but ultimately, the distinction between the good ones and the bad ones is that connection that they can make with the consumer, with that family, and that's
a good point. And then, Bob, in terms of the mechanics, do they go from room to room and they estimate this is 5 cubic yards, 2 cubic yards?
Exactly. We try not to think in terms of yards, but it's definitely cubic feet.
Cubic feet.
And we go around with handheld computer estimating devices that have customized software that we fine-tune for our purposes so that we can be pretty darn accurate on evaluating the volume of things to be moved, and secondly, the amount of packing that may be required if the customer chooses to purchase those services also.
Okay, so I'm going to quickly hit some terms here. I know there's a site prep. What's a site prep all about?
That has to do with protecting the residence or the apartment where we're actually going to be doing the work. Obviously, when you're moving furniture, things can get bumped or get scratched, and we package the items themselves that we're moving, but we also protect the residence itself. We put corner covers on doorways, and we put carpet covers and floor coverings to make sure things don't get scratched or dinged.
That's a good point. You mentioned about the movers. We have uniforms, you know, the training. We want to make sure that it's not just some people they picked up off the street.
Absolutely. One of the most important things is that all of our employees are background checked. As an agent for Atlas Van Lines, and pretty much any of the major carriers, we're required to background check anyone who would ever be in a residence of a customer.
I see.
And after they're cleared is when they are finally hired.
Okay. Now, in terms of, Mitchell, the packing and the crating, that's very important. That could run up a bill as well, depending on whether they have antiques or...
Yeah, depending on the value and the type of items that we're moving, yeah. It also depends on who's actually going to be doing that packing and crating. A lot of times companies will contract it out to third parties, but generally speaking, the estimator identifies what they need to be done, what needs to be done, and it really represents what we're talking about in terms of the overall amount of service.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the signing documents, I've heard that term before. What's a signing document?
Well, like any business in today's world, there's lots of paperwork.
Sure.
And we have requirements to meet for the state or federal government. The documents are pretty closely controlled so that they have the necessary information. So the survey and the estimate are documents that we sign, the customer signs. So we're clarifying the scope of work. Mm-hmm. Then on move day, if the property will not be delivered that day, we'll be doing a descriptive inventory of the property to get piece count and identify condition.
Okay.
If we're delivering that day, we'll just maybe point out a couple things to the customer and do that work that way. So these things are being done, and then the formal document is the bill of lading, and it's important that that's signed with the customer. It lays out the rate structures, it lays out the carrier liability for loss or damage, so that there's no confusion as to what the responsibilities of the carrier are to the customer.
Okay. And then, of course, the Mitchell, in terms of if they want to save some money, they could do the packing themselves?
Absolutely, yeah. Like you said earlier, a lot of the cost can end up coming from the packing and the services, those extra services. So, yeah, customers who feel comfortable packing their own belongings certainly can save money doing that.
I've seen at Home Depot they actually have tape now that will say, the roller tape will say kitchen, or roller tape will say bedroom and whatnot. Speaking of, we talked about movers and before, and we talked about our association and the real estate industry. We have a local realtor association, the state trade association, and a national. I believe you have something like that as well, Bob?
That's correct. Within the state of California, we have the California Moving and Storage Association, headquartered down in Los Angeles, with about 300 plus members of the association, conducting about 70% of the business that's done in the state.
Okay, now you mentioned storage, because that's another thing, Mitchell. Sometimes we will have, if it's a move across town or a move across state, and they're not ready for their belongings yet. Do you have a storage facility?
Yeah, that's most full service moving companies, as we are, have warehouses which we would store people's belongings in. It's for any of these situations, it's known as SIT, or storage in transit, and it follows along with the documentation. It's in the documents that we're talking about, the bill of lading and the estimate, and it just helps keep it all together and keep it flowing straight in terms of keeping it clear for the customer.
Yeah, and storage is billed typically monthly, and we also, many of us, have mobile storage containers, which is really useful for people who are staging their house before they move out.
Oh, sure, that's right.
So the items go into the container as the house is thinned out to make it more visitor friendly, and then those goods can match up again with the customer's property when they move to the next location.
Now, is that the self-contained pod that goes on the driveway we see down the neighborhood?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in terms of, I know you've spoken about having the homeowners be organized and be honest with themselves. So they really need this? Because I see people moving, and I thought, you're supposed to be moving, and I go to the home and they haven't started.
There's a wide range of response to the move process. Moves take place for many reasons, and people's approaches are just as wide-ranging. We sometimes feel like about 70% of the time folks aren't really ready when we get there.
Wow.
Sometimes slightly not ready, sometimes they completely flamed out, and when we get there, we find out that they haven't done it, they're in denial, and it becomes a bit of a mad scramble sometimes.
Oh, I would imagine. Now, in that particular situation, let's speak about when they hire different movers. In other words, how do they find one? When you do a background check, you go to the Better Business Bureau, which is always the old school way to do it.
Absolutely. The Better Business Bureau is still out there, very responsible with ensuring that a legitimate business as a moving company or any of these service providers response to customer issues.
Okay. Now, Mitchell, you're a younger generation, and we have the internet nowadays. And what your dad's referring to, back in the day, businesses would often in the window, it would say, "I'm a member of the Better Business Bureau," BBB. It was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
And now people are going to the internet, but the thing about the internet, anybody can write anything on the internet. With the Better Business Bureau, their complaints are screened, or if somebody wants to say something good about them, I would imagine that's screened as well. It's not your cousin or your sister-in-law.
Absolutely.
Well, actually, the BBB only posts information where there was a formal complaint.
Oh, well, that's true.
And
that's true.
from that point on, they administer.
Okay, and then they will follow through on it.
All the way through offering assistance with mediation.
Okay, now we also have, we have a lot of real estate attorneys on the show, elder law attorneys, and we're always talking, of course, the genesis of this was, this program is consumer protection. And in that, we want to make sure the vendors are insured, whatever the trade. How does insurance work within the moving industry? Who wants to take this one?
I think I'll roll with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Vector and Move Ahead Incorporated is a California corporation.
Okay.
We operate within the state of California under the regulations of the California Public Utilities Commission. They have certain requirements for insurance coverage, for liability, loss or damage, any of these different elements that are minimums that must be met in order to keep our license active. If our insurance lapses, the California Public Utilities Commission is notified, and it gets handled that way. So that is for moving within California.
Now that's insurance. What about bonding? In case there's damages, is it the same, one of the same?
It's one and the same. Bonding
Okay.
is a term you've heard of that really doesn't play very much anymore.
Okay.
So we carry and we provide certificates of insurance to any interested parties, whether that be a city entity for ongoing work, or a corporation, or if we're working in a building or a homeowners association is very frequently the case.
Oh, I see.
At condominium complex, the homeowners association will want to be named as an insured. So we provide these via fax or email on a few hours' notice to make sure that all of those liabilities are in place.
I see. Okay, now we have, let's speak about that California regulations. We have the California Public Utilities Commission.
Yes, sir.
How does that play out in the moving industry?
The estimating company, the mover, is required, if at all possible, to come out and do a survey in the residence. And based on the identified scope of the project, we are to give a not to exceed price. Pricing for services is based on a maximum rate tariff, so we are not allowed to charge more than a certain amount. The realities of a competitive market are that the maximum rates are not encountered to speak of.
Okay, you had mentioned in the past they used to have a minimum rate.
Yes.
Now it's a maximum rate.
Yes. They switched the tariff, I'm going to say about 12, 15 years ago, from a minimum rate tariff, which interestingly enough was 30 years ago $77.50 an hour for a truck and 2 men.
Wow.
And now, unfortunately, with a maximum rate tariff, we will sometimes find a moving company out there offering to have a truck and 2 men out in 2013 for $75 an hour.
Right.
So
okay.
something may not be right there.
Yeah, that's a thing. Okay, let's talk about pricing, Mitchell. What about locally by the hour?
Oh,
is that still another?
The differences between the two types of move we're talking about is a local move, which is defined as any move less than 100 miles between the origin, the original home, and the destination.
So that's local,
and
less
that's
than 100
locally,
miles. Okay.
And that generally is done hourly, so it's hourly labor, hourly packing, all based on an hourly rate. And then there's obviously the moves in a situation where they're moving over 100 miles. The California Public Utilities Commission mandates that we run those by weight. So it's a weight-based and a mileage-based. So it's more like a unit-based pricing system.
Okay. So just to clarify, Bob, there's insurance and there's licensing.
Correct. So we have a California Public Utilities license to operate as a motor carrier, a household goods motor carrier. And then for interstate shipments crossing state lines, we are a sales agency representing Atlas Van Lines, who is the national carrier with federal licensing in place.
So as soon as you cross state lines, you become...
We're Atlas then.
You're Atlas.
Yeah, we're Vector within California if it's across the state line, or the shipment is to cross the state line. We're Atlas Van Lines.
So within California, the governor's watching you, outside Uncle Sam's watching you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Now, in terms of that pricing of services, that there's a book in real estate. There's federal and state information that the consumer has to receive. I know, Mitchell, you spoke about that before. Doesn't everybody have to receive this booklet?
Yes, the rights and responsibilities when you move booklet is required on any kind of a move, whether it's local, within the state, or out of state. The specific language between a California move and an interstate move is a little bit different because the laws are obviously a little bit different, but they're always required to have received and signed for a copy of one of these booklets.
Now, is that, if they had different estimators at their house, would they receive 3 different booklets, or just before you sign the dotted line?
Nope, you should expect to receive the booklet during the original survey from every individual estimator that comes to your home.
So I know consumers don't like to sign things, especially when they're undecided. Do they sign for that, or do you log it in?
Technically, they do sign for it. The California booklet, it's the actual last page of the booklet they're signing for, and we tear it off and keep it. But yeah, they're required to make some note that they've received the booklet.
So really, they're not agreeing to anything; they're just receiving this booklet.
It's a receipt for the receipt.
Let's speak about the organizations. Okay, Bob. Again, we have the National Association of Realtors, California Association of Realtors, and then the local.
Sure.
So how does that play out for the consumer as well as the carrier?
Well, the California Moving and Storage Association has a website, as does the American Moving and Storage Association, and they provide lists of members in good standing.
Okay, all right.
They provide a great range of information to the consumer public. They provide the American Moving and Storage Association provides different certification programs for the training of estimators, not just the physical training of movers, so that the level of professionalism of the industry is enhanced.
Now, the gentlemen that are in the uniforms working, helping to move, what type of training do they go through? Is that industry-wide, or is it within a company, or is it?
It varies. As an agent for a van line, we are required not only to background check our people, but meet typical standards of training so that the crews are not just guys who've done it.
Okay. That reminds me, when I was helping my parents sell their old piano, and to move a piano is a big deal. We found a mover, and they specialize in moving pianos. And sure enough, big truck came up, and it was like painted over the side, and a couple guys, no uniforms, no paperwork. They wanted to take the piano across town. They didn't want a receipt for it. There's no paperwork. So clearly, I've heard about this with movers, people moving household goods. So can we talk about, I'm sure you have different industry terms for them that we probably can't use on the air. We'll call them renegades or entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a level of that out there.
Okay, so in those folks that are working, they get a truck, a couple friends, a hand truck. How do they operate? I know we've heard about, they're late with deliveries, they take too much money up front, and they might hold your belongings hostage. Can you speak to the problems?
Well, like any business, this industry has certain costs affiliated or associated with doing the work legally, safely, and completely. There's always a lag between reality and enforcement. So there are people out there who've cut corners. They'll be using personnel who may not be trained. They're going to use bad equipment. They won't spend money on uniforms. They may not have workers' compensation insurance on their employees.
Oh, that's
they
a
may
good
not
one.
even have a California PUC operating permit. The state shuts down a bunch of these folks and turns off their telephone numbers with some regularity.
Okay, by the way, workman's comp, when your movers are out on, if one of your movers, Mitchell, got hurt inside the home, they are covered under the workman's comp. It's
Yes,
not
of
the
course.
homeowner's problem.
Yep, exactly. We keep that hassle out of the homeowner's hair.
Now,
Exactly.
conversely, if they want to save a few bucks and they hire starving musicians to move their belongings, they don't have workman's comp.
Yeah, in that situation, if one of these workers was hurt on their property, they'd theoretically be liable. They could be sued for it. So
Okay.
it's a major issue that people don't necessarily see or realize, but is always there.
Now, you spoke about those websites. What's the organization again that has the websites?
American Moving and Storage Association, AMSA. I believe it's amsa.org.
Okay.
And the California Moving and Storage Association is thecmsa.org. THECMSA.org.
Okay. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of great information on there for the consumers as well that we're speaking
Yes.
about here today.
And maybe even more importantly, you've got the state regulatory body, the California Public Utilities Commission, which is,
Okay.
I believe,
cpuc.ca.gov.
Okay, and I think we have that on our screen.
And that they also have, you can confirm that the company is licensed by their California PUC listed number, and that they're in good standing. You can also get a lot of counsel and advice from that website. The federal website, protectyourmove.gov, operated by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, that's a mouthful. That's the regulatory body for the interstate moving, and they list the insurance standards and safety and insurance and complaint records of the interstate carriers like Atlas Van Lines.
Okay.
And they provide also a great amount of information to the consumer public.
Okay, so Mitchell, let's talk about this. I know that I've heard the term broker and I've heard carriers. What's the difference between a broker and a carrier?
Basically, it gets involved in the interstate portion. A broker is basically a sales-only agency who doesn't necessarily do any of the actual moving. They'll sell it based on whatever terms they have, and then they'll assign it to any guy in a truck who wants to haul it across the country. A lot of times what happens with that is if you do have damage or claims or missing items, it's hard to track down who was responsible, where the items went, when they went missing, that kind of thing, because the paperwork doesn't really match up as much as easily.
Okay.
Yeah, and with a carrier, it means that you're basically dealing with the same entity the entire way through, from the beginning till the end.
Now, we also have full service van lines, right? And then affiliation versus the independents. Bob, you want to take that? What's an independent?
Sure. Not every moving company represents a van line. It's the more established, the more complete, the ones who have the fuller range of services that are accepted to participate by these van line consortiums in interstate transport. Any moving company can have interstate hauling authority, and some small ones have those authorities, sometimes for a few states, sometimes for all states. But essentially, there are a lot of small companies in the community who do not have the authority to take things across state lines.
Right.
So when you're seeing a company that represents a van line, you know immediately, a van line you know the name of, you know that you're dealing with some people who are going to be here tomorrow.
Okay, so to recap, Mitchell, what are some of the tips right out of the chute here in closing? How can a homeowner weed out the independent that's really
Well, if
operating
you
on a banana peel?
if you start from the very beginning of the process, when they're making a call and scheduling an appointment, it's that booklet, the rights and responsibilities booklet. You should always be receiving that. The estimator these days, if they're doing it by hand, they're checking off things on a sheet, on a checklist.
So
that's even a little bit.
So if they don't have the booklet,
Mm-hmm.
if they're using a clipboard and a ballpoint pen,
that can be raise some red flags.
Two red flags.
In the original sales process. Then if you're going to the actual moving, any vehicle that moves in the state has to have either a state or a federal government registration number, their clearance number, their license number on the actual vehicle. And for that
frankly,
matter,
if I might interject here, a great thing to do to check out a moving company is look up their stated address on Google Maps.
Okay.
And see if there's actually a moving company there.
Okay, that's tip number 3 that we
Absolutely.
allowed. What about, I know a lot of the attorneys talk about you want to make sure they have workman's comp. They could provide you a proof of workman's comp.
We can always do that, absolutely.
Okay. Would that be the same for, so they have workman's comp, they need workman's comp and insurance?
Right.
And there's no problem representing or showing a binder of insurance.
Absolutely not.
So those are a couple of things that they could ask for. I'd like to see your workman's comp, and I'd like to see a copy of your insurance.
These are things that any real moving company should be able to provide very quickly with no issues at all.
Okay, and then we want to ask if in closing here, make sure that the employees are vetted.
Yes, background checked, trained, yeah, exactly.
Okay, father-son family-run business, Vector, a move ahead, Atlas.
Thank you, Pat.
You're in San Francisco?
Yep.
Yes,
But
we are.
you work up and down the peninsula.
All over, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks again for watching. We will see you next week. Take care, same time, same channel.